And I just want to quickly add, in our business, I've met dozens and dozens of companies and done gap analysis and assessments of compliance programs. And Jane Bulman and Comcast have absolutely one of the finest compliance programs in the country. And Jane runs it with a big stick. So she is the right person to be up here. She's a no-nonsense person in Comcast, and she definitely wields compliance in that organization, and again, it's one of the best. So,
but I have a good sense of humor. It's not just about the stick.
So we've done this together a couple of times, and it's always a pleasure to be up here with her. So really, what I want to do today is I want to talk a little bit about what this change is. The change to the TCPA compliance rules, but really most of the time is going to be on Jane's experience with how she's dealing with it, because this is something that every one of you right now, we've heard all morning about mobile marketing, about the mobile world. This rule change is the most significant regulatory change and barrier in the past 10 years. And think about what happened 10 years ago. We had the National Do Not Call Registry. And since that time, this is the most significant and impactful regulatory change that's going to affect every single company everywhere. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. I want to give most of the time to Jane to talk about what she's doing as in her company to deal with this new hurdle that's out there. And then we're going to wrap it up. So really, how many of you have actually heard of this TCPA change to calling mobile phones? How many of you feel you're very familiar with what it entails? A few less hands. So I'm going to quickly go over it. And by the way, I didn't get my poll numbers up here. I wanted to see how many of you thought that you knew how many mobile numbers you had in your database. But anyway, essentially the FCC has jurisdiction over mobile phones, including texting and calls. And the Federal Trade Commission does not. And so we've had two main rules, the telemarketing sales rule, we've had the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and they weren't the same. And so some companies were not under the jurisdiction of the Federal Trade Commission, banks, insurance, common carriers, to name a few. And then you had, but those entities were subject to the FCC's jurisdiction. So we had these rules that were not the same. So in 2010, they said, well, we're gonna work hard to make sure that these rules are the same so that we have consistency. So they announced in February of 2012, they issued this final rule. And boy, there were a lot of surprises. Not only are these rules not in sync, we now have, in my view, an even more difficult situation than we had before. And so this became announced here October 16th, just 2 weeks from now, basically. One of the primary changes in this rule is going to become effective and become enforceable. And that's mainly what we're going to spend our time on. These rules, the new TCPA basically deals with auto-dialing wireless numbers. So if you use a third-party call center, or if you have a call center and you use any kind of automated dialing technology, there is a good chance that you're auto-dialing numbers. And a lot of this technology has to be evaluated, but the bottom line is this rule applies to using that technology to call wireless numbers for the purposes of solicitation. So it includes your current customers. So even calling your current customers to renew or to expand on services, you're going to come under this new rule. Now, for other kinds of calls, such as debt collection, such as service calls, informational calls, you're going to be under the existing rule, which is a lesser standard. The rule today is that you have to prove that the party provided you their mobile phone in the context of the relationship. And if they've provided you that mobile phone and they haven't, revoked that consent, then even after October 16th, you can still call those persons with an auto dialer for non-solicitation purposes, okay? But a lot of marketers in here, marketers and compliance people, we know you like to get fancy with those informational calls. You like to add that little piece at the end. So, that's where you have to be cautious. So there's some other changes. We're really not going to get into too much of that. But here's the new rule, essentially. You have to have a new level of consent. It's called prior express written consent, where the current standard is called express consent. So the big differentiator is the term written, okay? So that standard, I talked about what is the standard today. It's just simply that somebody provided the number. A new standard is much tougher going forward. And again, it takes effect in 2 weeks. So what are these consent requirements? First of all, clear and conspicuous. You can't take this new consent rule language and stick it in terms and conditions. You can't have a bunch of other things that are unrelated, like trying to get consent for email, fax, a bunch of other things in one place. It has to be clear and conspicuous, separated from other things. You can't hide it in contracts, okay? Now, the good thing is the government said that electronic signature under the e-Sign Act will constitute a valid signature for the purposes of consent. So that's a good thing. That opens up a lot of opportunity for us here. But here are the ingredients of this consent that you need to pay attention to. And I know there's not a lot of compliance folks in here, but you need to ask the question as marketers, do your compliance folks really understand what this means? So here's the first element. The agreement, the disclosure, has to specifically indicate the seller. In other words, your company name. The consumer just can't say, well, I agree to be called. It has to say called by who. And this is very difficult if you're buying leads from lead generators, because those lead generator sources are going to have to provide you leads that have your company name associated with that consent. And that's a huge challenge for that industry that they're working on. The consent statement has to include the consumer's mobile phone number that they're consenting to, because sometimes when you're collecting information, they may give more than just the mobile phone number. They may give other numbers. So the consent statement has to have that specific number in it to which they are consenting. There must be an affirmation of agreement. So under e-sign, that would be something like checking an unchecked box. Okay, that's my affirmation. It could be an affirmative yes on a recorded call, on an inbound call, where the person says, yes, I agree. But e-sign requires an affirmation of agreement. And so the last part of this is really tough. And this is one thing that you've heard us talk about PACE, our association for customer engagement, the professional association. They're working hard with the FCC to try to tone some of these requirements down. But as of today, look at that first bullet. Your disclosure has to say that you're authorizing telemarketing calls. So I hereby agree to get solicitation calls. I agree that you're going to call me with an ATDS. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think a good percentage of your customers have any idea what an ATDS is, or an auto dialer? So that is a big concern to the industry. As well as this last bullet, you have to inform people that their consent is not required as a condition of purchase. You have to physically inform them of that fact. So those are the primary elements in this new consent standard that are very troubling. And again, it is effective for even your current customers in your current, that are currently your customers that you commonly might reach out to. You have to have this, all evidence of this, and the rule requires you to have specific evidence. The onus is on you to prove that you have it. So again, I'm not going to go through much of this, but because of e-sign, there are many ways of collecting this consent. You can actually use online forms as well as email, inbound, outbound calls, SMS texting, and so on. Many ways that you might collect it as long as you have the two main elements. One is you have made full disclosure in accordance to what I just showed you. Number two, you have an affirmation of agreement. So you have to have those two elements and evidence of those elements. We've already talked about this. What you got to do is what you have to do now is start collecting this consent. And if you're buying leads from lead generators, you need to be talking to them about what are you doing to make sure that the leads that I buy in the future meet this for my company and that I have evidence. So you need to be thinking about audits of those lead generators as well. Now, some of this Jane is actually going to talk about. How can you try various strategies for collecting this consent. So that's the quick overview of it. And right now, Jane, who's been living this with Comcast and has had a pretty good jump on what these requirements are, she's going to now talk to you about what her experiences have been. Jane?
Thanks, Ken. So all morning, we listened to what's happening now. Digital marketing, mobile marketing, online marketing. Here now, after lunch, we're talking about something from the past, telemarketing. Yes, it also includes texting, but essentially, for many of us, what this is really going to affect is going to be the telemarketing that we do. And with all of the reason that telemarketing is one of the most regulated sales channels is because of bad actors from years ago, of which I hope Comcast is not. And I don't think we are, and I think that's one of the reasons that, working with Compliance Point and Possible Now, we've tried to comply with the law, but also continue to do business because people still say yes on their phones and on their cellular phones. A quick story. A few years ago, Comcast didn't do any marketing, any telemarketing to cell phones. Way back when I was still trying to figure out, and this was probably maybe 5-6 years ago. And my son, who is now 28, so he was right out of college, he had a roommate who we were just talking one day, and the roommate said, because I said, yeah, I do telemarketing for Comcast, and he said to me, this is a 23-year-old, 5 years ago, how come I never get a call from Comcast with a special deal? And I said, well, what kind of phone do you have? What do you mean? I have this phone. It's a cell phone. I said, because we don't call because the government doesn't like us to make sales calls to your cell phone. And he said to me, and I quote, that's really stupid. And when you think about it, especially for that age cohort, and those coming up and all of that, this is the way people work. I mean, we talked about it all morning as well, or a good part of the morning as well. So the fact is, and he wasn't talking about texting, he was talking about a conversation, a customer engagement on the telephone. So this is still a very important sales channel for us, and because of that, we've spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. So up until now, and that's a lot of what Ken was saying, express consent. If the customer, and I'm sorry about I don't know why I'm getting that sound, but my apologies. I use my hands because I do. If a customer gave us a telephone number that happened to be a cell phone as a contact number, we considered that express consent. The only reason we wouldn't call it for sales purposes is because it went on the do not call list. What a concept. And we always honored the do not call requests. We currently don't do any text marketing. It's in the idea pipeline, but of course all of these rules will affect. So I'm not even going to talk about that today. I'm really just going to talk about telemarketing, or telesales as we like to call it now. We only call customers who gave us a cell phone number because we don't have permission to call non-subscribing homes or homes we have no existing business relationship with. And we started a number of years ago when we did start calling cell phones. Every program, every campaign, we would separate out into cell and landline so that we could track responses, so that we could track the size of the lists, so that we were prepared for this. Well, actually, we didn't do it because we were preparing for this, because we didn't think it was going to happen. But it was still useful to really understand how people bought and what was happening with landlines and cell phones. So one of the benefits of having tracked that over time is this. Wireless numbers are about 50% of all of our lists, all of our upgrade lists. That is the list when we're going to our existing customers. But I can't just look at that as one big number and say, oh, okay, we're going to lose half of our list. Because here's why. When I looked at 4 different target groups, and how many of you are cable Comcast customers or Time Warner or Cox? Okay, those of you who aren't, we need to talk, but all right. Or you're getting a call if you're in our area. But I'm going to use some cable terms here that are fairly self-evident, but these are 4 different groups of customers that we would call. One is somebody who only has video service, so cable customers from way back. Somebody that has high-speed data only, or our internet service only. And then the last 2, video plus internet, or video plus our phone service. If you look at this, the chart that you see here, if you're a video-only customer, that is the only thing you have with us is your television service, you are more likely to be a landline. Every time we go to this target to try to sell more to them, they are more likely to be landline. The landline number is in their contact. Any idea, any thoughts about why that might be? Any guesses? Age, absolutely. My mom and dad. You know, that's the number that's been on their account forever, and it's not changing. Internet-only customers, my son and his friends, they watch television online, whether it's through us or somewhere else, but they're getting. That's why they're more likely to be cell phone. The other 2 are a combination. People who are video and phone customers, they have our phone service already, so duh. They're landline customers, and that's why that's mostly blue, that line. So when we are looking on the effect that this will have on us going forward, we have to look at it by our target groups. So the answer to the question that Ken asked on what percentage of your customer base is landline versus wireless, it's almost a trick question for me, because I'm not looking at it as everybody. Because I'm looking at it by the people that I want to go to with specific messages. And I think that's important as we go forward and as we figure out how to use our resources most wisely. So just a couple of other facts that we have found as we're looking at, since we've tracked this for some time. Not surprisingly, contact rates are a lot higher with cell phones. When we went to start calling cell phones again, I'm really sorry about that noise. When we started calling cell phones again, one of the things that we said was we would prefer if you did not, whether we're working with our vendors or internally, don't call cell numbers during the day, because people are at work. You know, they gave us the contact number, but chances are they're at work or doing some other things, and it is more likely that they're going to say, I'm on my cell phone, I don't want to call now. As time has gone on, that's been a non-issue. If people don't want to talk, they won't pick up their phone, or they will get on the phone and say, call me later, or whatever. It has been a non-issue. The other thing we were concerned about when we started calling cell phones again, frankly, was people were going to get all upset about the fact that we were calling them on their cell phones and it was going to cost them money. And I think that's where this FCC rule really is kind of old news. It's just not the case anymore. Most of us don't have cell plans that are every single minute. So it's not an issue, and it hasn't been an issue. We don't get a lot of pushback. 0, really, maybe 1 call every 6 months from somebody really reacting to why you're calling me on your cell phone. That's going to change on October 16th. And I think it's going to change for those people who say, oh, I can get money out of Comcast because they're calling me on their cell phone. And by the way, the other part of that, the conversion rates, about the same, which is also instructive to say, maybe it's a little bit higher on the cell phone side of things, but the fact is that people, it's about the same whether we're calling landlines or cell phones, what kind of sales results we get. So how is Comcast preparing for October 16th? First of all, one of our vendors, we were talking about how do we get permission, because frankly I think there are two categories of solutions. One is the permission, and that's a lot of what we're talking about in customer engagement and the customer experience, but frankly I'm not sure that's going to get us enough numbers even over time. I mean, yes, I think preference marketing will help with that, and Comcast is on that track to do full preference marketing, but for right now I think that I'm not quite sure the permission is going to do it, but I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. The other answer, frankly, is technical, and I'll talk about that too. So one of our vendors, and we work with a small group, we were talking about, well, what can we do to get permission? Maybe the best thing to do is after someone has said yes on the phone to us, after we've gone through the process of saying, here's what your promotion will be, here's your installation date, you'll get this self-install kit, whatever the terms of the sale are, after all of that is done, how about then we ask them for permission? And this is, again, on the phone, it's not online, it's actually a conversation. So here's, after all that was done, very simply, here's what we were doing.
Okay, I see that we have reached you on your cell phone today. If it is okay with you, we would like your permission to continue calling you at this number using an automated technology to keep you updated on Comcast products, services, and special offers. Would you like to continue to receive the promotional calls on your Comcast or from Comcast on your cell phone?
Yeah, I guess that would be okay.
Okay.
Okay, so it's clunky. I get it. But at all the items, the only thing that's not in there that Ken had mentioned is that it's not a condition of the sale. Well, they've already bought. So working with legal, we didn't include that in this part of the discussion. But the fact is, 70%, actually it's even higher now. So we're closer to 75% of the time people are opting in. We saw a stat earlier today saying that opt-in should be closer to 85–90%. I was frankly thrilled with this because it takes a customer a little off guard, wouldn't you think, to hear that and ask for permission. But they've already said yes on the phone. They know what the experience is like. They know they just got a good deal, and it is working. Unfortunately, relative to the number of, well, it's 70%, and now we've got more and more of our vendors doing that. But in terms of big numbers, you know, we have over 20 million customers. We're not getting 20 million yeses at this point. So it's going to take a long time to build up that preference management on that, and that's really what this is. I don't like to think of this as, well, I've got to get written permission, and that's separate from marketing preference management. So eventually it's all going to come together. But still, I was pretty stoked at the fact that 70% of the people are saying yes, and we are developing with Possible now a process by which basically you take out the cell phones and put the ones that we have permission for back into our lists. So that's step number one. The other thing that we are doing online, of those of you that are Comcast customers, I hope you use My Account online, which is how you can manage how we bill you and how you pay us and other information. And we're building an opt-in message on there, which hopefully will be ready in time for October 16th. These things take time. The idea, though, is that we want to position it not as, here are the legal language points that we have to make to get your permission. We want to say something like, and we're still working on this language, but we want to say something like, want to hear about future promotions and new products and services that Comcast has. We'd like your permission to call you on this telephone number, because when you opt in, we know whether or not the number that you have in your account is a cell phone or a landline. So if it shows up as a cell phone, this message is going to come up to say, want to hear about it, please check here. And so we'll have all the right language. The clunky part is on automated technology, but we have to do it because the FCC says we have to do it, and that it's not a condition. You don't have to accept this to buy something from us. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I'm not, frankly, hopeful that we're going to get thousands and thousands or millions of people saying yes, but you never know, because some people like to do business on the phone. Technically, we have to, this is really going to be okay, and there was a court decision that just came down within the last couple of days that helps with this. We're working with our vendors and other solution companies to come up with alternate dialing solutions that take away automated telephone dialing system definition, and we are going to continue to call people's cell phone. And when they say, "Why'd you call me on my cell phone? You're not allowed to do that now," we have to have a very clear script that says, we understand that you gave us this number, we're not calling you on automated technology, it's not going to be an easy discussion, and I expect it fully to evolve over time, but that's what we're going to do, because most people won't challenge us on it, I don't think. I think that when they hear we're calling, we have something, list management aside, and that's all the stuff we talked about this morning. Let's go to the right customer with the right offer. That's happening. But how we do it will depend on what the customer's preference is. As the bullet there says, it's going to complicate the customer interaction if people think that they want to hear about it, or they think that the law is going to make them a lot of money, by suing Comcast. So what happens on October 16th? Based on our analysis, if we stop calling cell phones altogether, I lose my job. And that's not an option. I'm not ready to retire yet. 62% less sales. What we looked at is, can we better control, and working with, I see John from Noble Biz there, we're working with him on the solution, and our vendors are working with other solutions. But if we can maintain a decent contacts per hour, now I'm getting into telemarketing speak, but, and right now we average just over 10 contacts per hour. If we can get that in half, we're only going to lose 32%. If we can get that up to 6, we only lose 26% of our sales. But we're trying to find ways and bring that, and that's just looking at what we do today and what would happen contacting less people through our alternate dialing solutions and still being able to slowly gather for permission. We really have to manage the message. We have to make sure the scripting, like I said, makes sense, and that we respond appropriately. And we'll track it and see what happens. And then, if it turns out I'm out of a job, I'll be talking to all of you. We'll also manage that. So, bottom line is we're going to comply. I don't want regulators coming at me, but we still have to make sure that we'll sell and manage the customer experience. So, that's Comcast's plan. Turn it back to Ken.
Thanks, Jane. Thank you so much for that insight. One additional point I want to make, and she's alluded to it, I've got a lot of experience by working as an expert witness in about a dozen different cases, and many of those cases are TCPA class action. And it is all surrounding the issue of calling mobile phones, wrong party contacts, calling mobile phones without consent. And all of this is going on even before this. So this is going to be even a more restrictive environment where you're going to have class action lawyers analyzing every bit, every word of the disclosure you made or didn't make, as well as your ability to record keep and so on. So this is a very serious issue that needs a lot of attention paid to it. And you heard from somebody living it here that they're already calculating the cost even under the best circumstances. But we do think that over time, consumers are going to become used to this disclosure. Right now it's kind of a scary thing, for them to agree to be called with an auto dialer and for solicitation and all of that. But we think they're going to run into this everywhere. So So eventually it's not going to be that big of a deal. They'll understand that, it's a regulatory requirement and that's the reason you're asking for it. So quickly, just to wrap up here in our last few minutes, this to me, after having been in this compliance industry for a long time, this is probably the first major step in the U.S. to really change what has traditionally been in our country a pretty business-friendly environment. Yes, there's been some do not call legislation, but we've always had exemptions to be able to do business. This is not business-friendly whatsoever. And you have to look at what's going on, what's changing. And we think it's the global pressures. We're a global marketing environment here. And for a long time, the European Union and others around the world have been pushing us to do more in terms of privacy and protecting consumer rights and so on. So I think we're succumbing to that pressure. If you look at some of the other things that have been going on out there, a lot of different new regulations. If you're in the financial services industry, you're well aware of the CFPB and all of these other initiatives that are emerging recently. They're going to make it more and more difficult with the onus shifting from business-friendly to consumer expectation of privacy and so on. So really what this whole conference is about and what the Professional Association of Customer Engagement, what my preferences is all about, is this change in idea of managing through customer engagement, of trying to have the relationship to gain the consent, willing consent of our consumers, because really opting out is not a choice anymore that's viable. So we believe if you just ask, and what this is all about here today, that a lot of consumers will express their preference on, well, you can't contact me this way, but you can this way. And we think that's going to be really critical. And the good thing is, the thing we're ending up here is that all of this discussion today about customer engagement management, it is a perfect marriage with compliance. Because it is compliant, it supports all of the regulations and shows respect for privacy and the wishes of consumers. And as you've heard from many speakers today, it's certainly more effective than blasting unwanted messages. So we think that everything that CEM is about is perfectly suited for compliance. And we're not going to go through all these. We've talked about them. But some of the do's here, obviously trying to gain consent at every customer touch point, and ensure you have record keeping in your CRM. You have to be able to distinguish in your CRM who do you have prior express written consent from and who you don't, and particularly for the leads that you're buying. Some of the do nots here, you can't make it a requirement in order to purchase. You can't bury these disclosures in other terms and conditions. Don't use pre-check boxes. That's an old thing that's been around for a long time. Somebody will have a box and have it pre-checked already. That's not an affirmation of agreement, so not a good plan. And then you have to be very careful with this new consent law about sharing that consent with affiliates or subsidiaries, because remember, the consent has to be specific to the seller company. According to my clock, we started late, so we may not have a lot of time for questions, but Rob, we met our mission. We got done in our 40 minutes. So.
It isn't going to take me much longer, but for those of you who do have questions, maybe we can take, looks like one here, but also we can take it offline.
Absolutely.
Of course, at the break.
I just had one quick one. It was pretty clear that it said it needed written consent, but then you both talked about getting consent over the phone, so I just want a quick comment on that.
Well, the e-sign Act includes verbal audio recordings. It means you got to keep the recordings. So that call I played we're keeping that recording forever, digitally, but we're keeping it forever, and we can track back to that telephone number and that customer so that we can prove that that customer gave us consent.
Yeah, e-sign act essentially equates to written consent if you have those two elements we talked about, full disclosure and affirmation of agreement.
We'll take one more quickly, and then we'll take the rest offline.
In the CRM where you record multiple numbers, often residential or cell phone, are you required to require express consent as it relates to each line?
In our world, we have one primary contact number. So when we're running a list to do outbound telemarketing, we are just taking that one contact number. But if we wanted to use alternate numbers, we would have to appropriately find out whether it's landline or cell and do the same thing. We can't just say, oh, well, there's a cell there, but if the next, well, actually we can do this. We could go to the secondary number. We have chosen by policy only to use the primary contact number for telesales. But any number would you'd have to get permission. It's the number, not the customer.
That's right. So if you have two different mobile phone numbers, you would have to have evidence of consent for each one.